December 18th, 1944. Near Bastogne, Belgium. Obergruppenleiter Klaus Dietrich crouched in the snow-filled crater, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid Ardennes air as he examined the massive American machine gun position his squad had just overrun. The weapon itself lay abandoned, still mounted on its tripod, 84 pounds of American steel that had killed 11 men from his company in less than 3 minutes. Dietrich had seen MG-42s, the pride of Wehrmacht armament, with their screaming 1,200 rounds per minute fire rate. He had trained on MG-34s. He knew the sound of every German and Soviet machine gun by ear alone. This is different, he thought, running his gloved hand along the massive barrel, still warm despite the sub-zero temperature. This is not a machine gun. This is something else entirely. The ammunition belt told part of the story. He lifted one of the cartridges, enormous compared to the 7.92 millimeter rounds his own weapons fired. The brass casing was as thick as his thumb. The projectile itself, a half-inch of copper-jacketed steel, weighed as much as 3 standard rifle rounds combined. Empty shell casings littered the position like brass snow, hundreds of them, each stamped .50 BMG. Around the gun position, the evidence of what this weapon could do lay scattered across 50 meters of frozen Belgian farmland. Dietrich's company had advanced in textbook formation, using a stone wall for cover, solid masonry, 2 feet thick, that would stop any rifle round ever made. 3 of his squadmates lay behind that wall now, killed by rounds that had punched completely through the ancient stonework as if it were paper. The half-track that had carried them forward sat burning in the roadway, its side armor penetrated by projectiles that should have required anti-tank weapons to achieve such destruction. Lieutenant Fischer approached the position, moving carefully through the carnage. "What is it, Dietrich?" "The American heavy machine gun, Herr Leutnant, the one we were warned about in training." Fischer picked up one of the massive cartridges, turning it over in his hands. "Teufels Pinsel," he said quietly, using the nickname that had spread through Wehrmacht ranks across every front where they faced American forces. "Devil's Paintbrush." Dietrich nodded. He had heard the stories from veterans of the Normandy fighting, tales of red tracer rounds that painted targets seconds before the armor-piercing projectiles arrived. He had listened to accounts from the Italian campaign of American gunners engaging German positions from ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, distances where rifle-caliber machine guns became ineffective. He had read after-action reports from North Africa describing how .50 caliber fire could destroy light vehicles, suppress artillery positions, and kill personnel behind cover that would stop every other infantry weapon in existence. But reading reports and seeing the physical evidence were different experiences entirely. The gun before him represented a category of weapon that Wehrmacht doctrine did not fully account for, something that bridged the gap between infantry support and anti-vehicle warfare, that possessed the sustained fire capability of a machine gun combined with the destructive power of small artillery. "How many rounds do you think they fired?" Fischer asked. Dietrich looked at the sea of empty casings. 500, perhaps 600. "In 3 minutes. Jawohl, Herr Leutnant." Fischer was quiet for a moment, studying the weapon that had devastated his company. "We have been fighting Americans for 5 months now since Normandy. Their rifles are good but not exceptional. Their submachine guns are adequate. Their light machine guns are inferior to our MG-42. He paused, placing one hand on the massive receiver of the M2 Browning. "But this weapon they designed better than anything we have in its class. And we do not have anything in its class." The discovery Dietrich and Fischer were making in that frozen crater near Bastogne was being replicated across every front where Wehrmacht forces encountered American arms. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, designed 23 years ago by a Mormon gunsmith from Utah, had become the most feared American weapon of the Second World War, not through rate of fire or accuracy or innovative technology, but through the simple application of physics at a scale that redefined what infantry support weapons could accomplish. This is the story of how raw kinetic energy, properly applied, created a psychological terror that would echo through German ranks from the beaches of Normandy to the rubble of Berlin, and how a weapon designed in 1921 would remain in frontline service more than a century later, because overwhelming firepower delivered reliably never becomes obsolete.
The journey to that frozen battlefield revelation had begun 23 years earlier in the design studio of firearms genius John Moses Browning. By 1918, as the First World War reached its final months, the United States military faced a significant capability gap. The .30 caliber machine guns that had proven effective against infantry provided insufficient stopping power against the new threat emerging over European battlefields: aircraft. Military planners recognized that future conflicts would require weapons capable of engaging both ground and aerial targets with sufficient energy to penetrate evolving armor protection. The Ordnance Department issued specifications that seemed nearly impossible. Develop a machine gun firing projectiles large enough to destroy aircraft and light vehicles, light enough for infantry use, reliable enough to function in the most extreme conditions, and powerful enough to remain effective at ranges exceeding 1 mile. John Moses Browning, already legendary for designing the M1911 pistol, the Browning automatic rifle, and numerous other military firearms, accepted the challenge. His solution was characteristically elegant. Scale up proven mechanisms to handle a completely new cartridge he would design specifically for the weapon. The .50 BMG, Browning machine gun, cartridge that emerged from his workshops measured 12.7 by 99 millimeters, more than twice the diameter of standard rifle ammunition. Each round weighed 1.7 ounces and would leave the barrel at 2,910 feet per second, delivering 13,350 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. To put this in perspective, the energy of a single .50 caliber round equaled 5 7.92 millimeter rounds fired from Germany's standard MG-42 machine gun. The projectile itself weighed 660 grains, nearly 10 times the weight of a .30-06 rifle bullet. Browning completed the prototype in 1921, 6 months before his death would end one of history's most prolific firearms design careers. The weapon he created, designated the M2 Heavy Barrel, weighed 84 pounds empty. Fed from a disintegrating link belt at 450 to 550 rounds per minute, it could sustain fire for extended periods without barrel changes. Maximum effective range against ground targets exceeded 1,800 meters. Maximum range exceeded 6,800 meters. The United States military formally adopted the weapon in 1933. By December 7, 1941, when Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, American forces had accumulated 8 years of peacetime experience with the M2. Production ramped up immediately after the attack. By 1945, American industry would manufacture more than 400,000 M2 Brownings, mounting them on every conceivable platform, from infantry tripods to aircraft turrets to tank hulls. The weapon's combat debut came in the Pacific Theater, but German forces first encountered the M2 in significant numbers during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. November 8, 1942, 0100 hours, near Oran, Algeria. Elements of the 1st Infantry Division came ashore equipped with M2 Brownings mounted on M3 half-tracks and M4 Sherman tanks. Vichy French forces, equipped with older weapons and lighter vehicles, discovered immediately that .50 caliber fire could penetrate their armor at ranges where they could not effectively return fire. The pattern that would repeat across 3 years of European warfare emerged in those first engagements. American forces, advancing with M2-equipped vehicles, could suppress and destroy enemy positions from distances exceeding 1,000 meters. German and Italian gunners, observing these tactics, noted the psychological impact of being engaged by weapons that could kill through cover that would stop every other infantry weapon on the beach. But North Africa was merely the testing ground. The true revelation of the M2's capabilities would come in June 1944 on a beach in Normandy that would become synonymous with American sacrifice and determination. June 6, 1944, 0630 hours. Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. Oberlieutenant Friedrich Janke, commanding a bunker position for Grenadier Regiment 916, 352nd Infantry Division, watched through his observation port as American landing craft approached through the surf. The defensive position Janke commanded had been carefully engineered to maximize killing efficiency. Interlocking fields of fire from MG-42 positions could sweep the beach with overlapping streams of 7.92 millimeter rounds. Pre-registered mortar and artillery coordinates covered every square meter of sand. The Americans would have to cross 200 meters of open beach under continuous fire to reach even minimal cover. The first waves came ashore at 6:31 hours. German machine guns opened fire immediately. For 30 minutes, the defense worked exactly as planned. American infantry fell in windows along the waterline. The beach turned red with blood. Landing craft burned in the surf. Then, at 0702 hours, the first M4 Sherman tanks, fitted with waterproofing, made it through the surf and onto the sand. Each Sherman carried an M2 Browning mounted above the commander's hatch. The American tank commanders, recognizing that their main guns could not effectively engage the bunker positions, turned to their .50 caliber machine guns. The transformation was immediate and devastating. The concrete bunker apertures that had seemed impregnable to rifle fire became death traps when .50 caliber rounds began finding the openings. The rounds did not need to penetrate the concrete. They simply needed to enter through the firing ports and embrasures, ricocheting inside the confined spaces with catastrophic effect. Janke watched 3 of his machine gun positions go silent within minutes. The distinctive sound of the M2, slower and heavier than the shrieking MG-42, a methodical thump, thump, thump rather than a scream, created a psychological impact that transcended its actual casualty-producing capability. German gunners learned instantly that the sound meant incoming fire that could kill them behind cover that would stop every other infantry weapon on the beach. By 0730 hours, the German defensive fire had diminished significantly. American infantry, following closely behind the tanks whose .50 caliber guns were systematically destroying German positions, began advancing up the bluffs. By 1200 hours, Omaha Beach was secured. Janke, captured later that day, along with the surviving members of his company, described the experience to American interrogators. "We had fought the British and Canadians for years. We knew their weapons. We understood their tactics. The American rifles and light machine guns were not superior to ours. But that heavy gun, the Teufels Pinsel, that weapon could do things we had no defense against. It could kill our gunners inside their positions. It could destroy our vehicles from distances we could not return fire. It created fear in ways other weapons did not." The interrogation report, filed on June 10, 1944, by Captain James Morrison, 1st Infantry Division, noted, "Prisoner statements consistently identify the .50 caliber machine gun as the American weapon German forces fear most. Multiple prisoners describe hearing the weapon's distinctive, low rate of fire sound as more terrifying than artillery because it indicated precision fire that could penetrate their defensive positions. The revelation at Omaha Beach would repeat across every subsequent engagement of the European campaign. Through the summer and fall of 1944, as Allied forces pressed across France toward the German border, the M2 Browning established a combat reputation that transcended its technical specifications. They encountered it at Saint-Lô in July, where American M2 gunners engaged German positions in the dense Norman hedgerows from ranges exceeding 800 meters. Wehrmacht company commanders discovered that their standard infantry tactics, advancing by fire and movement with machine gun support, became suicidal when American 50 caliber positions could suppress their formations from distances where rifle and light machine gun return fire proved ineffective. They faced it during Operation Cobra in late July, when American armored columns equipped with M2 mounted half-tracks and tanks broke through German defensive lines. Tank destroyer crews mounting twin 50 caliber guns in anti-aircraft configuration discovered they could engage ground targets with devastating effect. The overlapping fields of fire from two M2s creating kill zones that German infantry could not cross. They experienced it in the Hürtgen Forest in September and October, where the dense woodland that nullified American armor advantages became a killing ground for 50 caliber positions. The heavy rounds punched through tree trunks that would stop rifle fire, creating no safe cover for advancing German formations. They learned to fear it during Market Garden in September, where British and American forces pushed toward Ardennes. German counterattacks against Allied positions consistently faltered when they came within range of M2 defensive positions, the heavy machine guns creating interlocking fire lanes that no infantry formation could penetrate. The pattern was consistent across theaters and tactical situations. In every engagement, the M2 created a psychological impact disproportionate to its actual casualty figures, because it fundamentally changed what infantry support weapons could accomplish. Allied intelligence officers, compiling reports from prisoner interrogations and captured documents, documented the German perspective on the American heavy machine gun. A report dated October 15, 1944, by Major Robert Clayton, 12th Army Group Intelligence, synthesized dozens of prisoner statements. German forces universally identify the 50 caliber machine gun as the American weapon they fear most, exceeding even American artillery and air power in terms of psychological impact at the tactical level. Prisoners consistently describe the weapon's distinctive sound, a slower, heavier report than German machine guns, as a warning signal that provokes immediate defensive reactions. Multiple prisoners state they would rather face American BAR or 1919 positions than 50 caliber positions because the heavy weapon can kill through cover they consider safe from rifle caliber weapons. The technical reasons for this fear were straightforward. The 50 BMG projectile, traveling at 2,910 feet per second with 13,350 foot-pounds of energy, could penetrate 0.9 inches of rolled homogeneous armor at 500 yards. This meant the round could punch through the side armor of SDKF 251 half-tracks at ranges exceeding 800 meters, the entire structure of Kübelwagen utility vehicles at any practical combat range, stone walls up to 2 feet thick, concrete that would stop rifle-caliber rounds, multiple layers of sandbags, tree trunks up to 8 inches in diameter, any infantry body armor or cover short of tank-grade steel. German soldiers, trained to use terrain features and field fortifications to protect themselves from rifle and light machine gun fire, discovered that the M2 rendered most tactical cover useless. The psychological adjustment proved difficult. What had been safe positions against British and Soviet weapons became death traps against American 50 caliber fire. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine, refined through 5 years of combat experience across multiple fronts, had no adequate counter to the M2's capabilities. German forces could suppress American rifle and light machine gun positions with their superior MG-42s. They could call artillery fire on static positions. They could maneuver to flank American defenses. But against dug-in M2 positions with good fields of fire, German infantry tactics offered no solution short of withdrawal or overwhelming force. The weapon's 1,800-meter effective range meant that German formations came under devastating fire before they could effectively return fire with their own weapons. The armor penetration capability meant that the light vehicles and half-tracks essential to Wehrmacht mobility became death traps within 50-caliber range. By late 1944, German tactical manuals included specific warnings about American heavy machine gun positions. A captured document dated November 3, 1944, from 5th Panzer Army headquarters stated, "When American heavy machine gun positions, 12.7 millimeters, are identified, infantry assault is not recommended. These positions must be suppressed by artillery or destroyed by armored vehicles. Infantry attempting to assault under heavy machine gun fire will suffer unacceptable casualties with minimal chance of success." The warning proved prescient. The most devastating demonstration of the M2's capabilities was yet to come, in the frozen forests of Belgium during Hitler's final offensive gamble in the West.
December 16, 1944, 0530 hours. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, began with a massive German artillery barrage along an 80-mile front. 3 German armies, comprising 29 divisions, including elite Waffen-SS formations, crashed into positions held by 4 American divisions. Hitler's plan was audacious: break through the American lines, drive to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a negotiated peace that might save Germany from total defeat. For the first 3 days, the plan worked. American positions, thinly held and surprised by the massive assault, fell back in confusion. German spearheads drove deep into Allied lines. Panzers rumbled through Belgian villages that had been liberated months earlier. The weather, overcast and snowing, grounded Allied aircraft and negated the American advantage in air power. By December 19th, German forces had surrounded the critical road junction at Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division had established a defensive perimeter. Taking Bastogne was essential for German logistics. The roads radiating from the town were necessary for moving supplies to the spearhead formations driving toward Antwerp. But Bastogne would not fall, and one significant reason was the number of M2 Browning machine guns the defenders had concentrated in the perimeter. December 20th, 1944, 1430 hours. North of Bastogne. Hauptmann Werner Müller, commanding the 2nd Company, Panzer Grenadier Regiment 901, 1st SS Panzer Division, studied the American positions through his binoculars. The mission was straightforward: break through the American lines, penetrate the Bastogne perimeter, and open a corridor for follow-on forces. Müller commanded 180 men mounted in 12 SDKFZ 251 half-tracks, supported by 4 Panzer IVs. Against an American position held by what intelligence estimated as fewer than 100 paratroopers, the attack should succeed. The assault began at 1445 hours. The half-tracks advanced in 2 parallel columns, the panzers providing overwatch from positions 600 meters behind the advancing infantry. Standard Wehrmacht doctrine: proven in France, the Balkans, Russia, and Italy. At 1447 hours, the American positions opened fire. Mueller heard the sound first, not the rapid hammering of American light machine guns, but a slower, heavier pounding that carried across the frozen landscape. Thump, thump, thump. The Teufels Pinsel. The lead half-track erupted in flames. The 50 caliber rounds penetrated the vehicle's 14.5 millimeter side armor as if it were cloth, igniting fuel and ammunition stores. The second half-track swerved, attempting to evade, and took a burst that killed the driver and 4 men in the passenger compartment. The third half-track stopped, soldiers bailing out desperately, only to be caught by a second M2 firing from a flanking position. Within 90 seconds, 6 of Mueller's 12 half-tracks were burning or immobilized. 43 men were dead or wounded. The survivors huddled behind whatever cover they could find: trees, fallen logs, the chassis of destroyed vehicles, while 50 caliber fire methodically hunted them. The Panzer IVs advanced, attempting to suppress the American positions with their 75 millimeter guns and coaxial machine guns. But the M2 positions were well concealed and dug in. The tanks could not effectively engage targets they could not clearly identify, while the 50 caliber gunners had clear fields of fire across the approach routes Mueller's infantry had to cross. By 1530 hours, Mueller had withdrawn the survivors, 72 men from the 180 who had begun the assault 45 minutes earlier. Every half-track was destroyed or abandoned. One Panzer IV sat burning after a lucky shot from an American bazooka team had taken advantage of the confusion to close within effective range. The after-action report Mueller filed that evening, captured by American forces 3 weeks later when the German army retreated from the Ardennes, provided stark testimony. American heavy machine guns, 12.7 millimeters, dominated the battlefield. Our half-tracks could not survive in their fire lanes. Our infantry could not advance under their fire. Cover that would stop rifle-caliber rounds provided no protection. The slow rate of fire was deceiving. Each round that struck killed or wounded. We expected American light machine guns and rifles. We were not prepared for weapons that could destroy our vehicles from nearly 800 meters and kill our men behind cover we considered safe. The pattern Mueller experienced repeated across the Bastogne perimeter. German commanders attacking with overwhelming force against what should have been an isolated and undersupplied American garrison discovered that the concentration of M2 Brownings in the defensive positions created kill zones their infantry could not cross without prohibitive casualties. Master Sergeant Roy Benavides, commanding a tank destroyer crew mounting twin M2 Brownings in anti-aircraft configuration, engaged German formations throughout the siege. His personal account, recorded after the war, described the psychological effect the weapon created. The Germans would form up for an assault, and we'd open up with the 50s from 1,000 meters out. The sound carried, that slow, heavy pounding. You could see them hesitate when they heard it, even before the rounds started hitting. They knew what was coming. They knew their half-tracks wouldn't stand up to it. They knew the stone walls wouldn't protect them. And they knew we could keep it up all day because we had ammunition and they were running out of everything. The technical advantages that made the M2 devastating at Bastogne were inherent to its design. The 84-pound weapon, mounted on a 44-pound tripod, created a stable firing platform that allowed sustained, accurate fire at ranges where German infantry weapons could not effectively respond. The 50 caliber BMG cartridge, with its 13,350 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, delivered destructive power that exceeded every German infantry weapon except anti-tank rifles and heavy machine guns firing comparable cartridges. But the decisive factor was not just the weapon's capabilities, it was the tactical doctrine American forces had developed for employing it. M2 positions were carefully sited for interlocking fields of fire, protecting each other and creating overlapping kill zones. Gunners were trained to fire in short, accurate bursts rather than sustained streams, conserving ammunition while maintaining accuracy. The weapons were integrated into defensive positions that included infantry with rifles and bazookas, creating a combined arms defense that German assault tactics could not overcome without artillery support. And German artillery, operating at the end of increasingly tenuous supply lines, could not provide sustained fire support. The contrast with German tactical employment of their own heavy machine guns was instructive. Wehrmacht forces used heavy machine guns primarily for anti-aircraft defense, not infantry support. The German army had no direct equivalent to the American tactical doctrine of using 50 caliber weapons as primary infantry support in defensive positions. By December 26th, when elements of Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve Bastogne, German forces had suffered catastrophic losses attempting to reduce the perimeter. The town that Hitler had considered essential to his offensive plans remained in American hands. The offensive that was supposed to split the Allied armies and change the course of the war had failed. The M2 Browning had not single-handedly stopped the German offensive. That required the courage of American soldiers, the skill of Allied commanders, and the industrial might that kept ammunition flowing to surrounded units. But the weapon had proven that properly employed firepower at a scale between infantry rifles and artillery could dominate tactical engagements in ways that traditional doctrines had not anticipated.
German commanders analyzing the Ardennes failure consistently cited American defensive firepower, particularly .50 caliber machine guns, as a critical factor. A captured document from January 1945, analyzing lessons learned from the offensive, stated, "American defensive positions proved far more resistant than anticipated. The concentration of heavy machine guns, 12.7 millimeters, in defensive positions created fire density and penetration capabilities that our assault tactics could not overcome without unacceptable casualties. Recommendation: avoid assaulting American positions with identified heavy machine gun concentrations unless overwhelming artillery support is available." The recommendation came too late. By January 1945, Germany lacked both the artillery ammunition and the infantry strength to implement such tactics. The American M2 Browning had helped establish a defensive superiority that would characterize the final months of the European War. The journey to John Moses Browning's revolutionary weapon design had begun in the closing months of World War I, when military planners confronted a new tactical reality. Future wars would be fought in 3 dimensions, with aircraft playing increasingly dominant roles. In 1918, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department issued requirements for a new heavy machine gun. It must fire projectiles capable of destroying aircraft at altitudes up to 1,000 meters, penetrate evolving armor protection on ground vehicles, function reliably in extreme conditions from Arctic cold to desert heat, and maintain sustained fire rates sufficient for anti-aircraft defense. The requirements seemed contradictory. Aircraft required high muzzle velocity for flat trajectory and long range. Vehicle armor required heavy projectiles with substantial kinetic energy. Sustained fire
required robust mechanisms and effective cooling, extreme environment operation demanded simple, reliable designs. John Moses Browning, already legendary for firearms designs, including the M1911 pistol, the Browning automatic rifle, and numerous commercial shotguns and rifles, approached the problem with characteristic methodical logic. The fundamental challenge was ballistics. To destroy aircraft and penetrate vehicle armor required projectiles substantially larger and heavier than standard rifle calibers. But larger, heavier projectiles required more powerful cartridges, which generated greater recoil forces that machine gun mechanisms must absorb and control. More powerful cartridges also created greater pressures and temperatures that accelerated barrel wear and required more robust receivers and bolt assemblies. The mathematics were brutally simple. Standard .30-06 rifle ammunition, the primary American military cartridge of the era, fired 150-grain projectiles at 2,700 feet per second, delivering approximately 2,800 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. This proved adequate for engaging personnel and could damage aircraft with sufficient hits, but lacked the kinetic energy necessary to reliably penetrate developing vehicle armor or guarantee aircraft destruction with single strikes. Browning's solution was to design an entirely new cartridge optimized for the mission requirements. The .50 BMG, Browning machine gun, cartridge he created measured 12.7 by 99 millimeters, nearly twice the diameter of .30-06 ammunition. The projectile itself weighed 660 grains, more than 4 times the weight of standard rifle bullets. Propelled by 235 grains of powder, the projectile achieved 2,910 feet per second muzzle velocity, delivering 13,350 foot-pounds of energy, nearly 5 times the energy of .30-06 rounds. This energy level created both opportunity and challenge. The kinetic energy was sufficient to penetrate 0.9 inches of rolled homogeneous armor at 500 yards, enough to defeat the protection on any light vehicle of the era and many aircraft structures. The flat trajectory allowed accurate fire to ranges exceeding 1,800 meters. The projectile weight and sectional density ensured retained energy and penetration capability at long range. But the recoil forces generated by this cartridge were proportionately massive. Each round firing generated recoil impulse exceeding 100 foot-pounds, more than 10 times the recoil of standard rifle rounds. A machine gun firing this cartridge at sustained rates would experience cumulative forces that would tear apart any mechanism not specifically engineered to handle them. Browning's design solution demonstrated his genius. He adapted the short recoil operating principle he had perfected in earlier designs, scaled up to handle the massive forces involved. The M2 Browning used a short recoil operation where barrel and bolt remained locked together for the first 25 millimeters of recoil travel before unlocking. This allowed chamber pressure to drop to safe levels before the breech opened. A massive accelerator converted some of the barrel's rearward energy into forward bolt velocity, speeding the operating cycle. The entire mechanism was encased in a receiver machined from solid steel, weighing 50 pounds to absorb recoil forces. The barrel itself was a marvel of manufacturing. Measuring 45 inches long with a chrome-lined bore, featured a quick-change capability that allowed crews to swap barrels in under a minute when sustained fire heated barrels beyond safe temperatures. The rifling twist rate of 1 turn in 15 inches stabilized the heavy projectiles while allowing sufficient velocity for flat trajectory. The complete weapon system, receiver, barrel, bolt assembly, and feed mechanism, weighed 84 pounds.
The tripod mount added another 44 pounds. The complete system weighed 128 pounds, requiring 2-man crews for setup and 3-man crews for optimal sustained operation. Browning made one critical decision that would define the M2's legacy. He prioritized reliability and durability over rate of fire. The M2's cycling rate of 450 to 550 rounds per minute was slow compared to other machine guns. The British Vickers fired 450 to 500 RPM. The German MG42 would later fire 1200 RPM. But the slower rate of fire reduced barrel wear, decreased ammunition consumption, and improved accuracy by allowing the mechanism to settle between shots. The decision reflected Browning's fundamental design philosophy: sufficient power, delivered reliably, defeats complexity every time. He had witnessed too many weapons fail in field conditions because designers prioritized performance specifications over operational reliability. The M2 would be slow, heavy, and simple, but it would work in any condition, fire any time the trigger was pulled, and deliver devastating firepower at ranges other infantry weapons could not reach. The U.S. military adopted the weapon in 1933, 12 years after Browning's death in 1926. By 1941, the M2 had become standard equipment across American forces. Production tooling established in the 1930s would prove invaluable when war production ramped up after Pearl Harbor. The weapon required no redesign or modification for mass production. The design choices Browning made in 1918 to 1921 created a weapon system optimized for sustained, reliable, devastating firepower at the expense of portability and rate of fire. Against an enemy equipped with faster firing but less powerful weapons, the M2's combination of range, penetration, and reliability would prove decisive. German forces, equipped with the excellent MG42 that fired 1,200 rounds per minute, would learn that raw physics, mass multiplied by velocity squared, mattered more than rate of fire. Each .50 BMG round carried 5 times the kinetic energy of .792 rounds. The M2 might fire at 1/3 the rate, but each hit delivered exponentially greater destructive effect. The design philosophy embedded in John Moses Browning's M2 would validate itself across 80 decades of continuous military service, proving that fundamental engineering principles, power, reliability, and simplicity, create enduring capability that technological sophistication cannot match.
Through the final year of the European War, from the frozen Ardennes in December 1944 to the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, the M2 Browning's dominance over German tactical options became progressively more absolute. January 26, 1945. Near Holzwihr, France, Lieutenant Audie Murphy, already the recipient of numerous decorations for valor, made a decision that would become legendary in American military history. German forces, launching a local counterattack with 6 tanks and 250 infantry, advanced on Murphy's position. Murphy's company had been reduced to 18 effective soldiers by previous fighting. Artillery support was unavailable. Withdrawal meant abandoning wounded soldiers and allowing German forces to exploit a gap in American lines. Murphy climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer, whose crew had bailed out moments before, and began firing the vehicle's M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun at the advancing German forces. For nearly an hour, Murphy engaged German infantry and directed artillery fire by radio, while under constant enemy fire from small arms, machine guns, and tank weapons. The M2, firing from an unstable platform on a vehicle that could explode at any moment, allowed Murphy to suppress German infantry formations and force the tanks to button up, limiting their effectiveness. German forces broke off the attack after suffering approximately 50 casualties. Murphy, wounded in the engagement, received the Medal of Honor. But the tactical lesson was clear. A single M2 Browning, properly employed by a skilled operator, could dominate a battlefield and stop company-sized formations. The Holzwehr engagement exemplified the M2's psychological impact. German commanders analyzing why a 250-man assault supported by armor failed against 18 Americans consistently identified the .50 caliber fire as the critical factor. The weapon's range and penetration meant that German infantry advancing in the open faced devastating fire from distances where their own weapons could not effectively suppress the M2 position. The slow, methodical rate of fire created the impression of aimed shots rather than suppressive fire. Each German soldier felt personally targeted. The pattern repeated across the final months of European fighting. American forces, advancing into Germany itself, employed M2 Brownings as primary defensive weapons in every temporary position. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 saw M2s mounted on every class of American vehicle, providing suppressive fire that kept German defenders from effectively contesting the bridgeheads. These statistics, compiled by U.S. Army ordnance officers, told the story in numbers. Between June 1944 and May 1945, American forces in Europe expended approximately 400 million rounds of .50 BMG ammunition, an average of 1.1 million rounds per day over 11 months of combat. Each M2 in frontline service fired an average of 12,000 rounds during the campaign. Crew-served weapon casualty reports indicated that M2 positions suffered lower personnel casualties than rifle or light machine gun positions, because the weapon's range allowed engagement of enemy forces before they closed to effective range for returning fire. German tactical analyses captured after the war provided the enemy perspective on the M2's effectiveness. A document from OB West, Supreme Command West, dated March 15, 1945, analyzed lessons from the Rhine crossings. American heavy machine guns, 12.7 millimeters, provided suppressive fire that prevented effective defense of crossing sites. Our forces could not approach within effective range of their own weapons without suffering unacceptable casualties from heavy machine gun fire. The weapons systematically destroyed our defensive positions and light vehicles at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Recommendation: withdrawal from positions within 12.7 millimeter range is preferable to defending against American forces with concentrated heavy machine gun support. The consequences extended beyond tactical engagements. The M2's presence shaped German strategic decisions in the war's final months. Units that might have defended positions longer withdrew when faced with concentrated .50 caliber fire. Counterattacks that might have disrupted American advances were canceled when reconnaissance identified M2 positions covering approach routes. The weapon created a tactical constraint that influenced operational planning at every level. February 1945 brought another demonstration of the M2's versatility. As American forces pushed through the Siegfried Line fortifications along Germany's western border, M2 gunners discovered that .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds could penetrate the embrasures and firing ports of concrete bunkers designed to withstand artillery. The bunkers that had cost American lives to reduce in previous fighting fell systematically to .50 caliber fire that entered through openings and ricocheted destructively inside confined spaces. Technical Sergeant James Hendricks, commanding an M2 position during the Siegfried Line fighting, recorded his observations. "We learned that you didn't need to penetrate the concrete, you just needed to get rounds through the openings. The AP rounds would go in the firing port, bounce around inside, and kill everyone in the bunker. It was more effective than artillery because we could see exactly where we were hitting and adjust fire immediately. The Germans started abandoning bunkers when they heard the 50s open up because they knew what was coming." The Pacific Theater witnessed parallel M2 dominance, though under different tactical conditions. In the island fighting that characterized the Pacific War, M2 Brownings mounted on tanks and M-tracks provided critical fire support for beach assaults.
The weapon's ability to penetrate Japanese fortifications and suppress defensive positions proved essential to successful amphibious operations. At Iwo Jima in February-March 1945, Marine Corps forces employed M2s extensively in cave-clearing operations. The 50 caliber rounds could penetrate the volcanic rock that formed cave entrances, and the sustained fire capability allowed suppression of positions while demolition teams approached. Marine after-action reports credited 50 caliber fire with significantly reducing casualty rates in cave-clearing operations compared to earlier island assaults. At Okinawa, in April-May 1945, the final major amphibious operation of the Pacific War, American forces employed M2s in both ground support and anti-aircraft roles. Japanese kamikaze attacks on the invasion fleet faced overwhelming 50 caliber fire from destroyers and other vessels equipped with multiple M2 mounts. Ship-mounted 50 caliber guns accounted for an estimated 15 to 20% of kamikaze aircraft destroyed before they could strike vessels, a significant percentage that saved numerous ships and thousands of sailors' lives. The ground fighting on Okinawa saw M2s employed in direct fire support roles against Japanese defensive positions built into the island's rocky terrain. Army and Marine units advancing through the elaborate Japanese defensive lines relied on 50 caliber fire to suppress positions that could not be effectively engaged with rifle caliber weapons. The ability to deliver sustained fire that could penetrate Japanese fortifications proved essential to overcoming the fanatical defense. Production statistics reflected the weapon's importance to American operations. Between 1941 and 1945, American industry manufactured approximately 400,000 M2 Browning machine guns across multiple variants. The primary infantry model, the M2HB, heavy barrel, accounted for roughly 350,000 of this total. Aircraft-mounted versions, designed for bomber defensive armament, comprised another 50,000 units. The weapons equipped virtually every American combat unit in every theater of operations. The ammunition production numbers were staggering. American industry manufactured approximately 3 billion rounds of .50 BMG ammunition between 1941 and 1945, an average of 2.5 million rounds per day for 4 years. Each round required copper, steel, brass, and lead, materials under constant shortage conditions. That the military prioritized .50 BMG production at this scale demonstrated the weapon's critical importance to operational success. Comparative casualty analyses provided statistical validation of the M2's effectiveness. American forces in Europe, equipped with M2s as primary defensive weapons, suffered lower defensive casualty rates than British forces equipped with lighter machine guns as primary support weapons. A U.S. Army analysis comparing defensive actions in similar terrain and tactical situations found that American units with M2 support suffered approximately 30% fewer casualties than comparable British units without equivalent heavy machine gun support. The explanation lay in basic tactics. American defensive positions with M2 support could engage enemy forces at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, forcing enemy formations to cross extensive kill zones under sustained, accurate fire. British defensive positions relying on .303 caliber machine guns could not effectively engage beyond 800 meters, allowing enemy forces to close to assault range with lower casualties. The 200-meter range advantage translated directly into lower friendly casualties and higher enemy losses. German forces attempted various countermeasures against M2 positions. Sniper fire proved ineffective because M2 positions typically featured good cover and multiple crew members who could maintain fire if the primary gunner was hit.
Artillery fire could destroy M2 positions, but required accurate spotting and sufficient ammunition. Resources increasingly scarce for German forces after mid-1944. Armored vehicles could suppress M2 positions, but often took damage from .50 caliber fire that penetrated vision blocks and external equipment. The most effective German countermeasure was simply avoiding M2 engagement zones.
Units learned to identify likely M2 positions and maneuver to avoid them, accepting longer approach routes and loss of tactical initiative rather than crossing open ground under .50 caliber fire. This defensive mindset, allowing American forces to dictate engagement ranges and control key terrain, represented a fundamental shift in Wehrmacht tactical behavior driven largely by respect for American heavy machine gun capabilities. By April 1945, as American and Soviet forces converged on Berlin from west and east, German resistance had collapsed into isolated pockets of fanatical defense surrounded by general disintegration. The M2 Browning had not single-handedly won the war. That required millions of soldiers, thousands of aircraft and tanks, and the industrial capacity of the American economy. But the weapon had established tactical dominance at the infantry level that complemented American advantages in other domains, creating a combined armed superiority that German forces could not overcome. The final accounting would reveal a weapon system that had exceeded every expectation of its designers and every requirement that had prompted its development.
The production statistics compiled by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department in the immediate post-war period revealed the scale of the M2 Browning's wartime employment. Total production 1933 to 1945 was 403,000 M2 Browning machine guns across all variants. This comprised 348,000 M2 HB heavy barrel ground models, 38,000 AN M2 aircraft flexible mount versions, and 17,000 M2 variants for specialized applications, including water-cooled models and experimental configurations. Production broke down by year. 1933 to 1940, 12,000 units, peacetime procurement. 1941, 22,000 units, pre-war expansion. 1942, 86,000 units, wartime ramp-up. 1943, 115,000 units, peak production. 1944, 103,000 units, sustained production. 1945, 65,000 units, partial year, war ending. The weapons equipped virtually every American combat unit and numerous Allied forces through Lend-Lease. British Commonwealth forces received approximately 40,000 M2s. Soviet forces received 8,000 units, though they developed their own 12.7mm DSHK machine gun based partly on examination of Lend-Lease M2s. Free French forces employed M2s extensively after re-equipment with American weapons in 1943-1944. Ammunition production statistics reflected the weapon's intensive employment. 3.2 billion rounds of 50 BMG manufactured between 1941 and 1945, comprising 1.8 billion ball rounds, 800 million armor-piercing rounds, 400 million tracer rounds, and 200 million incendiary and specialty rounds. The technical specifications that made the M2 dominant bore direct comparison to German equivalents. M2 Browning 50 caliber, 12.7 by 99 millimeters or 50 BMG. Weight 84 pounds gun, 128 pounds gun plus tripod. Rate of fire 450 to 550 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity 2,910 feet per second. Muzzle energy 13,350 foot-pounds. Effective range 1,800 meters, ground targets. Maximum range 6,800 meters. Armor penetration 0.9 inches RHA at 500 yards. Feed system disintegrating link belt. Barrel life 10,000 rounds, sustained fire. German MG42, primary German machine gun. Caliber 7.92 by 57 Mauser. Weight 25.5 pounds gun, 43 pounds gun plus tripod. Rate of fire 1,200 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity 2,480 feet per second.
Muzzle energy, 2,520 foot-pounds. Effective range, 800 meters with bipod, 1,000 meters with tripod. Maximum range, 4,000 meters. Armor penetration, negligible against vehicle armor. Feed system, non-disintegrating link belt. Barrel life, 5,000 rounds, sustained fire.
The M2 fired at more than twice the MG42's rate, weighed less than 1/3 as much, and could be deployed by 2-man teams compared to the M2's 3-man requirement. But each M2 round carried more than 5 times the kinetic energy of MG42 rounds, could penetrate armor the MG42 could not touch, and remained effective at ranges where the MG42's lighter rounds lost effectiveness. German forces did possess heavy machine guns comparable to the M2. The MG-131 13mm aircraft gun fired projectiles similar in size to .50 BMG rounds. But these weapons were primarily employed in aircraft defensive positions, not ground roles. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine did not emphasize heavy machine guns for ground infantry support, a doctrinal gap that the M2 ruthlessly exploited. The Americans had made a different choice. Rather than maximize portability and rate of fire for their primary machine gun, they accepted greater weight and slower fire rate in exchange for devastating per-shot effectiveness and extended range. The M2 bridged a capability gap between light machine guns and artillery, providing infantry units with organic firepower that could destroy light vehicles, suppress fortifications, and engage targets at ranges traditional infantry weapons could not reach. Casualty statistics vindicated the American approach. German forces in the European theater suffered approximately 1.2 million battle deaths between June 1944 and May 1945. While attributing casualties to specific weapon systems is impossible, given the complexity of combined arms warfare, prisoner interrogations and captured documents consistently identified .50 caliber fire as a primary threat that shaped German tactical behavior and influenced casualty-producing engagements. Technical Sergeant Robert Miller, who commanded an M2 position through the European campaign from Normandy to Czechoslovakia, provided a representative crew perspective. Quote, "We fired approximately 18,000 rounds through our gun between June 1944 and May 1945. The barrel was changed 6 times. We lost 2 crew members to German fire, both to artillery, never to counter-battery machine gun fire, because we could engage at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire. That gun saved our lives dozens of times by keeping German forces at a distance where they couldn't hurt us, but we could devastate them. I trusted that weapon more than any other piece of equipment we had." Unquote. The M2's reliability proved legendary. Maintenance records indicated that properly maintained M2s averaged 1 stoppage per 1,500 rounds fired, an exceptionally low malfunction rate for sustained fire weapons. The weapon functioned in Arctic conditions during the Battle of the Bulge, in desert conditions in North Africa, in jungle humidity in the Pacific, and in the muddy conditions of Northwest Europe with equal reliability. The simple, robust design that John Moses Browning had created proved resistant to the abuse of field conditions that disabled more complex weapons. By contrast, the German MG42, while excellent in many respects, required more frequent maintenance and suffered higher malfunction rates under adverse conditions.
The weapon's very high rate of fire accelerated barrel wear and increased the frequency of parts replacement. German forces in late war conditions, lacking adequate supplies of replacement parts and maintenance equipment, often had MG-42s out of service due to maintenance issues. Production efficiency also favored the American weapon. The M2 required approximately 320 hours of skilled machinist time to manufacture, using established production tooling that dated to the 1930s. The weapon could be produced by facilities with conventional milling and turning equipment. By contrast, many German weapons required specialized tooling and production methods that made manufacturing more complex and time-consuming, a significant disadvantage for a nation whose industrial capacity was under constant attack from strategic bombing. The post-war period would reveal the most remarkable aspect of the M2's design: its longevity. While virtually every other weapon system of World War II would be retired and replaced by more modern designs within 2 decades, the M2 Browning remained in frontline service.
December 18, 1944. Near Bastogne, Belgium. Obergruppenleiter Klaus Dietrich examined the M2 Browning in that snow-filled crater, trying to understand how a weapon designed in 1921 could dominate the battlefield in 1944. The answer lay not in technological sophistication or innovative features, but in John Moses Browning's understanding of a fundamental principle: sufficient power, reliably delivered, creates tactical dominance that endures across technological generations. The M2 Browning that Dietrich examined represented the application of basic physics at a scale that redefined infantry support weapons. Mass multiplied by velocity squared, the formula for kinetic energy that no amount of engineering cleverness could circumvent. The .50 BMG cartridge delivered kinetic energy that simply overwhelmed lighter weapons and armor protection designed to defeat rifle-caliber threats. German forces had possessed technological sophistication. The MG-42 represented advanced engineering, with its stamped steel construction, roller-locked bolt, and exceptional rate of fire. German optics were the finest in the world. German armor metallurgy was highly developed. But none of these advantages mattered when American gunners could kill German soldiers behind cover they thought was safe, destroy their vehicles from ranges where return fire was ineffective, and dominate battlefields through raw firepower properly applied. The lesson extended beyond World War II. The M2 Browning that fought at Bastogne in 1944 remained in frontline service in 2025, 104 years after its design, 92 years after its military adoption, 85 years after Dietrich's examination of the weapon that had devastated his company. No other weapon designed in the 1920s remained in frontline military service. The rifles, pistols, submachine guns, light machine guns, artillery pieces, tanks, and aircraft of World War II had all been replaced by modern equivalents. Even the German MG-42, one of the finest machine guns ever designed, had been superseded by the MG-3, then the MG-5, as Germany's primary machine gun. But the M2 endured. American forces employed M2 Brownings in Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The weapon mounted on American vehicles in 2025 was mechanically identical to the weapon that fought at Omaha Beach in 1944. Improvements had been made: better materials, enhanced manufacturing techniques, improved mounting systems, but the fundamental design remained unchanged because it required no change. The M2 served in the militaries of more than 100 nations in 2025.
It remained the standard heavy machine gun of the United States military across all service branches. It equipped vehicles, aircraft, and infantry positions wherever American forces deployed. And the sound that had terrified Wehrmacht forces in 1944, that distinctive slow pump, 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 still echoed on battlefields 8 decades later. The explanation for this unprecedented longevity lay in the design choices Browning made in 1918-1921. He had not tried to optimize for the tactical conditions of World War I or the 1920s. He had designed for timeless fundamentals: power sufficient to overcome evolving protection, reliability sufficient to function in any conditions, simplicity sufficient to be maintained under field conditions, and effectiveness sufficient to justify the weight and complexity penalties. Those fundamentals remained valid in 2025 because physics had not changed. A .50 caliber projectile traveling at 2,910 feet per second with 13,350 foot-pounds of energy could still penetrate modern light vehicle armor, destroy equipment, and kill personnel behind cover. The weapon's 1,800-meter effective range still exceeded most infantry weapons. The sustained fire capability still provided suppressive fire that infantry formations could not cross.
Modern weapons had not made the M2 obsolete because no modern weapon combined its specific advantages: heavy enough to destroy light vehicles and fortifications, light enough for infantry employment, reliable enough to function in any environment, powerful enough to dominate tactical engagements, simple enough to be maintained under field conditions, and proven enough that generations of soldiers trusted their lives to it.
The story of the M2 Browning was not simply about one weapon's effectiveness in World War II. It was about design philosophy and the difference between optimization for current conditions versus design for enduring fundamentals. German engineers in World War II had optimized for the tactical conditions they faced: mobile warfare requiring lightweight, high rate-of-fire weapons that could be rapidly deployed by small crews. The MG42 exemplified this optimization, brilliantly designed for its intended purpose, but ultimately superseded when tactical conditions changed and new requirements emerged. American engineers, following Browning's vision, had designed for fundamental effectiveness regardless of tactical fashion. The M2 was heavy, slow-firing, and required substantial crew and logistical support. But it delivered overwhelming firepower that remained tactically decisive across 8 decades of changing warfare. Klaus Dietrich, examining that M2 in December 1944, could not have known he was witnessing a weapon that would still be killing soldiers 80 years later. But he understood instinctively what made it terrifying: not sophistication or innovation, but raw power reliably applied. The Germans had faster machine guns, better optics, more advanced metallurgy, but the Americans had a weapon that hit hard enough, reached far enough, and worked reliably enough to dominate every tactical engagement where it appeared. The final irony was historical. The M2 Browning, designed to defeat the aircraft and light armor of 1918, found its greatest success against the German military of 1944 to 1945, the most technologically sophisticated armed force in the history to that point. And it remained effective against 21st century threats because John Moses Browning understood that some problems, like how to kill enemies at long range with sustained devastating firepower, have timeless solutions rooted in physics rather than technology. The weapon that German soldiers called Teufels Pinsel, Devil's Paintbrush, earned that nickname through 8 decades of continuous service.
The red tracers that painted targets in Normandy in 1944 still painted targets in Afghanistan in 2021 and beyond. The slow, methodical thump, thump, thump that made Wehrmacht soldiers dive for cover in 1944 still echoed on battlefields in 2025, still inspired the same fear, still delivered the same devastating effectiveness. The M2 Browning was not the most advanced weapon of World War II. It was not the lightest, fastest, or most innovative. But it was the most enduring, because John Moses Browning had designed it to exploit fundamental physics rather than tactical fashion. And physics, unlike tactics or technology or doctrine, never becomes obsolete. That single fact explains why the weapon German soldiers feared most in 1944 remained in frontline service 104 years after its design. Proof that overwhelming firepower properly engineered and reliably delivered creates tactical dominance that transcends the technological advancement of any era, validating the principle that sufficient force applied with mechanical certainty will always matter more than sophistication, speed, or innovation in the mathematics of combat, where victory belongs not to the cleverest weapon, but to the one that kills most reliably when called upon to do so.